So breaking news just coming in. Ange Postecoglou's job at Tottenham might be under risk. Well, we sort of knew it would be under risk, but there are certain sources on Twitter and social media today saying that Ange Postecoglou is likely to be sacked and replaced by Thomas Frank. It's not actually been backed up by any sustainable sources, just a few journalists here and there, but I've not seen the likes of Fabrizio Romano or David Ornstein clarify. The only journalist I've seen put his hat into the ring has been Ali Gold, and Ali Gold said that a decision will be made this week. So today on the Sonny Talk Spurs YouTube channel, we're going to be reacting to these reports, and I'm going to be giving my overall thoughts on the matter. But if you are new to the Sonny Talk Spurs YouTube channel and you want to see more videos like this reacting to breaking news that could be very monumental for the season, then leave a like, subscribe, and also hit the notification bell because it'll let you know when I've gone live. And also in the comments down below, should Ange be sacked and be replaced by Thomas Frank? So that's the news coming out today, that apparently Tottenham have been in talks with Thomas Frank this week, letting him know the project and transfers. Now, I haven't really, kept it a secret that I have questioned Ange Postecoglou at many phases this season. I thought that, from the Everton game, that's when I was losing a lot of faith in him. But then there's reports come out that saying that he sacrificed our Premier League form, which saw us finish 17th in the table, to go and win the Europa League. Our first trophy in over 17 years. And, it was a monumental triumph out in Bilbao. I was absolutely buzzing like most Spurs fans have been. But I've always had question marks over whether Ange should keep his job even after winning a trophy. And basically, the fan base is going to be very divided on this one, because many will say, well, Ange did what he said. He said he'd win in his second season. He has won in his second season. But is that good enough for what he did in the campaign in general? 22 losses in the Premier League, 17th in the table, out of the other two competitions, but he won the Europa League, which, is massive for a club like Spurs. But could this be used as a springboard now? Does Daniel Levy sit there and go, right, I could sack Ange Postecoglou, bring in a new manager with, signings that he actually wants to back at this manager with, actually spend some money, and hope that Tottenham move up the Premier League table, do well in the Champions League campaign, and also go again in other trophies? It's a very tricky situation, because I've flip-flopped most of this season about my opinions of Ange Postecoglou. Most recently, I've sort of said, he did win it, so maybe he has given himself a chance of keeping his job. But when you look at sort of how the season panned out last year, it was quite untenable when it came to his Premier League career. And then the reports say that Thomas Frank could be the manager to come in. Now, Thomas Frank would be my favourite to replace Ange Postecoglou, but is he good enough? Is he good enough for what we need? I saw a lot of people want Inzaghi or a manager of an elite level, but we saw Inzaghi in the Champions League last night absolutely get handed his backside. So it is a very weird situation, because I think there's a lot of Spurs fans that think if we can't get a better manager, then we might as well stay with Ange Postecoglou. But could we have that Erik ten Hag-ness of, going into this season, being mid-table, lower table, come Christmas, and then sacking him anyway? What's the point of giving him a pre-season of summer when we could give another manager that? But I think many people will be divided on the appointment of Thomas Frank if he is made a permanent, the permanent boss at Spurs. And the other names, Marco Silva's and Andoni Iraola, have not really given Spurs fans that sort of, energy and vibe of this is a good idea. So it is a very tricky situation. Obviously, none of these reports have been clarified by the club or any other sources, but there are a lot saying that Thomas Frank would be the favourite if Ange Postecoglou was to leave the football club at any point in the next coming weeks. But we need to really get our, arses in check, because, a lot of teams around us are making signings. I did a transfer video the other day, go and watch it if you haven't already, they're all making moves and we're not at the moment. So the transfer window is now open and teams are ready to sign players, and Tottenham need to have a massive summer on their hands. I think they've got a nice, there's a good squad there already, but we need a bit more. And also, there's been rumours this week that the dressing room still back Ange Postecoglou. including Christian Romero. If Christian Romero is to stay, he wants to play under Ange Postecoglou. He doesn't want to play under another boss, so that could see him go as well. So Daniel Levy has got a massive decision on his hands, because he's done this before with managers. You know, he sacked Jose Mourinho in the lead up to a cup final to not give him the last laugh. He kept Ange Postecoglou in the job so he could have a crack at the Europa League. You know, it's a really tricky one, and I'm really unsure. I feel like, you know, I don't really mind either way. I'm happy if we keep Ange, but if we sack Ange, I don't mind getting Thomas Frank. I think that's where my sort of mindset is at the moment when it comes to this news, because I just think, you know, what's the harm in giving Ange maybe a little bit more time, because he has proven it. He has gone out there, and maybe with a more fit squad and, you know, more players at his disposal, he can do it. But at the same time, is this football sustainable over a 38-game league campaign with Champions League football and cup competitions to compete in? Thomas Frank has shown at Brentford that he can juggle a lot of things and keep them consistent and, you know, manage in his means, which Levy will like. And that's a bit that does worry me about Thomas Frank. I think we'll see Levy continue to operate how he has done for, you know, his entire tenureship at Spurs. So it is really a complex situation that I'd love to know all your guys' opinion on, because I just think that, and I've expressed this on videos. I said this to a group of friends yesterday, Joe Tomlinson, Sacha Tavolieri and all that. We went out, had a lovely day, watched Champions League final. Tottenham, Tottenham are at a crossroads, because they could do one of two things here. It can absolutely be the catalyst and the main thing to now go on to the next level, the level that we know. We've won a trophy, we've proved we can win a trophy, and we've got the money to spend. But who is the manager who leads that fight? And we've got to hope that Daniel Levy makes that right decision, because at the moment it's so up in the air. It's a very confusing time at Spurs, because we've had one of the best seasons and the worst seasons. You know, 17th in the Premier League, but we won a trophy. And, you know, many people have debated, was it a better season than Arsenal? It was certainly a more successful season, but does that mean better? I personally think it does. But, yeah, it's going to be a really telling summer. We've got to go out there, make some big signings, some big statements, keep all our top players as well, and hopefully get to that next level, whether that's under Ange Postecoglou or Thomas Frank. And, you know, I'd rather, as I say, rather have Thomas Frank than a Marco Silva than Andoni Iraola. I would really like to see him work wonders, and if you can bring in Buemo or a Visser or, you know, any player like that calibre, then we should be in good stead. Maybe Ange Postecoglou has a bigger pool than Thomas Frank. You know, will people want to play under Thomas Frank as much as Ange Postecoglou? It's hard to tell. You know, Ange Postecoglou was able to sign James Maddison, Mickey van der Ven, Solanke. He convinced them to sign. Even Mathys Tel, he convinced to sign. So, yeah, it's a very complex situation with Spurs, because I just feel like it's never normal. You know, every other club going into next season, as I say, a lot of teams have made signings. Manchester United made Cunha. Liverpool making some big moves this summer as well. City look like they're going to sign some key talent, and we're just sort of unknown again. You know, Ange Postecoglou's gone on holiday. His future looks well under threat, and, you know, the reports are just divided at the moment.
Let's talk about Tottenham Hotspur, because reports today suggest that Ange Postecoglou's future is set to be decided this week once the Australian returns from his holiday. What is the latest as we understand it? Because he's not back yet, and they certainly haven't made a decision.
No, he said after the Europa League final that his plan was to go on holiday the Monday after the Premier League season finished. Obviously, he did that without seemingly having had any conversations with with Daniel Levy about his future. It's our understanding that there's still been no conversation, no communication from the Tottenham board to Postecoglou. I know Perry's got his view on that. If he does depart, and I still think he probably will, Postecoglou, we've been reporting for a while now that Thomas Frank is one of the leading contenders. We know there's admiration from the Tottenham board for Marco Silva and Roberto De Zerbi as well. But I think Thomas Frank very much the front runner should, as we expect Postecoglou lead the club.
Well, this season he has delivered the first trophy in 17 years, but watched his team suffer 22 Premier League defeats, and that's just in the Premier League alone. But the dithering is unusual for Spurs, who are usually quite decisive. Should they have ended the speculation by now? Because by delaying the decision, Perry, and taking their time, to get their ducks in order. Other clubs are stealing a march in terms of recruitment. Look at Manchester United, already started to do theirs. You know, we've heard about Chelsea. They not only signed Delap, but they're in the market now for other players too. So what's happening at Tottenham, and what does this suggest?
They're just waiting to get their duck in order, which will be their next manager. And you said there could be Thomas Frank. And if I was a Spurs fan, I'd be delighted if he was going to be my next manager, as long as he had the say of players that are coming in and going out, because he's an excellent manager. From Postecoglou's point of view, Daniel Levy can't make a decision like Manchester United did on 100 minutes of football, because even beating Manchester United in the final, Spurs still played sort of defensive football against one of the worst Man United teams we've seen, definitely in the Premier League, and if you really haven't in their history. But he won the trophy. So from Postecoglou's point of view, you go, happy days. You said you always win in your second season. But the whole season, he laughed off the Premier League. You could tell that he laughed off the Premier League, obviously coming 17th. And if you have that equation with Manchester United, where they tried to replace Erik ten Hag, they couldn't get anybody. They gave him extension on his contract. The players know that the ownership, like Brailsford and Ratcliffe, didn't fancy the manager. Yeah. These players know that Daniel Levy doesn't fancy Postecoglou. All he would be, if you kept him on, he would be 3 games away from getting the sack. If he loses 3 games on the trot, which is every chance you could, then he goes. And I think it's a part of, is it unconscious coupling? What was it? Gwyneth Paltrow
and Chris Martin
said, where you talk to each other and you go,
conscious uncoupling.
Yeah, you go.
Not an unconscious coupling. Well, that's a slightly different game together.
That would be unconscious as well, wouldn't it? Because he ain't going to know nothing about it. So, so it's like, it should be, thank you very much, you got us a trophy. It's going to be, you know what Daniel Levy's like, about the payoff. We know what is in Postecoglou's contract to pay him up. Look, I think he won't be Spurs manager beginning next season.
Well, they've already signed Kevin Danso. His loan move has been made permanent, but that was already sort of part of the terms of the initial deal anyway. So it's not a massive surprise that that's gone through. Timo Werner's gone back to RB Leipzig. His 18-month loan deal is over. Goalkeepers Fraser Forster and Alfie Whiteman and left-back Sergi Reguilon are going to be released at the end of the month. There is a change above the manager. The new structure with the executive team, with Vinay Ventukasesham taking over as chief executive officer, is expected to implement changes to the medical team and the sports science teams that have been sort of changed over the course of the last year anyway. Ryan Mason looks as if he's going to strike out on his own as a manager in his own right, and Fabio Paratici is coming back.
Yeah, and Johan Lange is going to stay on in some capacity. My understanding is that he would work underneath Paratici, but that's interesting when it comes to Thomas Frank, because they've got quite a long-standing relationship, so that could be a trump card for Spurs in terms of getting him out of Brentford. But this is an expensive decision for Daniel Levy. He got a big bonus, Postecoglou, for winning the Europa League. He'll obviously get a big payoff should he depart. And all these managers that we're talking about, Thomas Frank, Marco Silva, Roberto De Zerbi, are all in work. And I think the release clause for Thomas Frank is in excess of £8 million.
Well, Ange has put his hands up and said the league form was unacceptable. But should a trophy, and Spurs don't win trophies very often, Perry, have earned him the chance to build on that success? And I ask this for 2 reasons. One, to respect the achievement of winning the trophy, because that should be, I think, respected. But more significantly, you've recruited and moulded the squad for this guy's style. And traditionally, Spurs aren't massive spenders. Spurs haven't got a raft of cash. And as Crook has already illustrated, paying off the manager, getting a new one, is going to be a huge capital expenditure anyway. Then you've got to think about trying to get new players in, ripping it all up and starting with someone else who's got a different system. Does that not prove counterproductive unless you're certain that the next person that's coming through the door is going to be the one, bearing in mind over the last 5 years they haven't really had a great history of hiring new managers?
You talked about systems, right? And everybody knew, obviously, Postecoglou is the high press, high back line. That's why they kept, especially Mickey van der Ven, kept getting hamstring injuries, because he was the last defender, wherever he's sliding or sprinting to try, obviously, and negate the danger. So you're not telling me that these players can't play in a different system. And if it's Thomas Frank, he's proven that he can change his style and his system depending on what players he's got. So when he was at Brentford at first, had Ivan Toney up front. Brentford went long, didn't they? They played percentages, had long throws, brilliant from free kicks and corners. Toney goes, Brentford play a completely different style now. 4-3-3, obviously Wissa up front and Wermo, they play through the lines, they play a little bit more out from the back. So he can be adaptable. So I don't think you can say just because a team's used to playing a certain style that you can't change the manager, because these players weren't into Postecoglou's style anyway. You've got halfway through the season, they lost complete faith in that height, because he did change, didn't he? He did start to sit a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
because he knew the players weren't in it.
He certainly sat deep in the final, that is for sure. I wonder what Spurs fans think of that. 03717223344.
So yeah, they're my thoughts on the situation. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you Ange in, Ange out, and would you like Thomas Frank? But until next time, hope you have enjoyed. Leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell if I get my words out. And until next time, see you later. Bye.